recognizing unaccompanied youth was not even a thing. The community had focused on chronic homelessness, had focused on veterans homelessness, but unaccompanied youth were not really identified as a discrete population. And the reason is because they're hidden.
Right.
They stay in the shadows because the streets are so dangerous.
This is Hourglass, the podcast for United Way of King County in Seattle. Coming up, a conversation about addressing youth homelessness. We'll chat with Tricia Raikes, the co-founder of the Seattle-based Raikes Foundation, which not only responds to youth and young adult homelessness, but works to prevent it from happening in the first place. Tricia Raikes and United Way of King County Partnership Manager Danie Radic will discuss how our organizations are partnering to ensure that every young person has a safe and stable place to call home. We'll also discuss our free summer meals program for school-age children and a local volunteer opportunity. I'm your host, Joe Burris. Thanks for tuning in. In a nation this wealthy, this resourceful, and this prone to proclaim that it prioritizes the well-being of its children, there are two words that should never be uttered in the same sentence: youth homelessness. But youth homelessness is in no way an oxymoron. Instead, across our nation, it's commonplace. According to the Denver-based National Conference of State Legislatures, each year about 4.2 million youth, young adults, and teens experience homelessness in the United States, including 700,000 unaccompanied minors, meaning they are not part of a family or accompanied by a parent or guardian. Data from the Chapin Hall Policy Research Institution at the University of Chicago says that LGBTQ youth experience homelessness at more than twice the rate of their peers, and that they are more likely to experience adversities before and during homelessness. Here in Washington State, there were more than 42,000 students experiencing homelessness during the 2022-2023 school year, according to Seattle-based nonprofit Building Changes. And here in King County, the Regional Homelessness Authority's 2024 point-in-time count says that 1,959 youth and young adults experienced homelessness last year, including unaccompanied minors. But thankfully, as awareness has grown about youth homelessness, so have efforts to do something about it. There are many organizations committed to providing rapid responses for those who fall into homelessness, as well as preventative measures to keep them housed. They include the Seattle-based Raikes Foundation, which works with organizations like United Way of King County to ensure that every young person has a safe and stable place to call home and access to the education system. The foundation has partnered with United Way to provide support via programs like YDIP, which stands for Youth Diversion Infrastructure Project. Launched in February of this year, YDIP provides financial assistance to young people at risk of homelessness or losing access to stable housing. The program focuses on supporting youth transitioning out of foster care, juvenile detention, or other programs, ensuring that they have the resources needed to achieve and maintain stable living situations. YDIP provides flexible funds to expense anything that results in housing outside of the emergency homelessness system within 30 days of payment. Those funds can cover expenses like rental assistance, application fees, utility assistance, and relocation costs. In addition to YDIP, both United Way and the Raikes Foundation believe that advocacy is key to targeting the root causes of youth homelessness, and we center young people in our work to support policies and push for funding streams that create systems change. And then there's the education component. The Raikes Foundation says that young adults that do not graduate high school have a 3.5 times higher risk of experiencing homelessness than their peers who do graduate. It works with grant partners, schools, and communities to improve graduation rates and to ensure that schools are equipped to help young people have stable housing. Through its partnerships with United Way and other organizations, the Raikes Foundation has reduced the number of young people experiencing homelessness in Washington State by 40% since 2016. And around the same time, the foundation says that the graduation rate for students who experience homelessness in Washington State has increased by 37%. United Way is proud to partner with the Raikes Foundation as we both use holistic approaches to address youth homelessness with the hopes of someday ensuring that those two words are never used in the same sentence. Recently, Hourglass sat down with Raikes Foundation co-founder Tricia Raikes and Danie Radic, United Way Partnerships Manager, to talk about how our organizations address youth homelessness. We begin with Tricia, a former Director, Creative Services, Marketing Communications at Microsoft, who co-founded the Raikes Foundation with her husband Jeff, a former president of Microsoft's business division. Tricia began by explaining the origins of the Raikes Foundation and what steered it in the direction of addressing youth homelessness.
Both Jeff and I came from modest backgrounds. I grew up here in Seattle in a working class family. And Jeff came from rural Nebraska. He grew up on a farm. So the work we do now is quite different than sort of our backgrounds and opportunities. But I think the thing that was common for both of us is that service was a very strong ethos in both of our families. I grew up with a mother who was our church secretary.
Cool.
And so there were plenty of opportunities, and she did not hesitate volunteering her children to help out as well. But she was kind of the consummate volunteer, both at church but also in community. Mm-hmm. She was the first one to always raise her hand and volunteer, and we would canvass the neighborhoods. I would go alongside, and she would really support a number of organizations, including United Way, back in the day. So that was the environment that I grew up in, and Jeff, very similar. His family is very similar. Even after long days on the farm, he would observe his mom and dad always reaching out and helping neighbors, as you do in rural communities. So that was really the backgrounds that we came from. Different paths led us to Microsoft, where we met. Mm-hmm. And fun fact, we were the first couple to meet and get married at Microsoft. Oh. So that's an interesting little,
awesome.
little piece to our history. Uh-huh. But when Microsoft went public, that was really a game changer for us relative to the amount of resources that we had available to us, sort of well beyond our imagination. And so for us, there was never a question of the sense of responsibility that we had to return that wealth to society. Sure. I think for us, the question was, how do we do that well? How do we do that effectively? So that really started us on our learning journey. We did not start out with a foundation. I think for us, it was really a dive into deep learning. So went to plenty of gatherings and a lot of United Way gatherings to learn and to meet people, to learn about the work that was happening in our region, and to begin to get a sense of where we felt there was a fit for us. Okay. We were always oriented towards, if we're going to put the effort in, we really want to make sure that we are working on an issue that is both under-resourced and that is focused on populations that are underserved. Right. And of course, over time, we really also were very hopeful that it would be long-term change that we could sort of help to facilitate.
Okay.
So I started the foundation we started the legal structure in 2002, and I hired our first ED in 2006, 2007, the same year that Jeff and I were co-chairs of the United Way campaign here in King County. So that was kind of a nice intersection for us. But that was when we really started to put our heads down and really develop our strategic work. So I led in the early days to really identify some of the foundational issues around youth that would be the cornerstone of our work. And a few years later, after Jeff finished his tenure at the Gates Foundation, he came to work. Okay. At the end of the day, young people are at the center of our work. Right. I think, and we were very lucky because we both aligned on that. I think, though our careers certainly informed how we wanted to run the foundation, with strong, sort of business structures. And certainly my background, branding and marketing, sort of helped to understand the importance of audience, the importance of purpose. But it was really our personal lives that I think guided the heart of what we did then and what we continue to do now.
And what were some of the challenges that you faced? You talk about your background in marketing. What are some of the challenges you faced in getting the foundation off the ground? And then how did you meet those challenges?
Well, I think the work was really inspired by our role as parents. So, raising 3 kids, and even with all of the privilege and resources that we had, our eldest had pretty significant bullying experiences in middle school. And so for us, that was where we started. So we dug into articles, we dug into reading a lot of research papers. And what started to intrigue us was really, I guess, what you might call the root cause under bullying. Like, why are kids so mean in middle school? And that led us to what was emerging science at the time, adolescent brain research, and also some really profound research coming out of Stanford, the science of belonging. And what we recognized from all of that information gathering is that kids need more than just, academic experiences. They also need to have that sense of belonging. They need to feel safe. They need to feel seen. They need to feel listened to and respected. And so those continue as sort of core values today throughout, really across our portfolio.
Perfect. And so now, Danie, can you talk to us a little bit about YDIP? Just everything about and the youth that are served through that and how that relates here.
Yes. So YDIP stands for the Youth Diversion Infrastructure Program. The big word here is going to be diversion, which is a subset of Housing Hope that tries to make sure that people are diverted or kept from entering the homeless system. Especially for young people, we find that if someone does enter the homeless system, they have a very high recidivism rate where they will continue to be homeless for years following. So the goal of YDIP is to make sure that we keep these young people housed and give them anything that they need to maintain housing, whether that be funding for a car to get to and from a job, ability to travel to a family member who may be able to take them in and keep them housed. And so luckily, with the help from the Raikes Foundation, we've been able to keep this very flexible and give a lot of options to young people on coming up with that diversion plan with their provider, and are able to give a lot of fund sources to things such as transportation, move-in costs, deposits, anything that they might need to help set them up for a good future as they go into adulthood.
And so expand a little bit on our systems of care. What kind of young people are we serving?
Yeah, so YDIP is brought to you by the Office of Housing and Youth. And they require young people under the age of 24 to receive this program. But you can serve anyone or a household with young people from the age of 0 to the age of 24 who are exiting a system of care that's supported by the Office of Housing and Youth. For our YDIP program, I would say majority of the young people that we served did come from the welfare or foster care system, which, speaking from personal experience, I have a brother and sister who are both adopted. My parents are very big on the foster care system. So even when you are into a family that does have a lot of privileges, you still have a lot of things stacked against you. And so something like YDIP is very helpful to listen to your needs and meet you where you're at in order to give those resources. But we also have systems of care such as behavioral health or rehabilitation centers, even Office of Housing that focuses on families who have children with refugees or refugee background. So we do keep that pretty open. But yes, our biggest one would be like welfare foster center, followed by juvenile detention and rehabilitation centers.
Awesome.
That's fantastic.
Really is. I got this from your website, Tricia. The Raikes Foundation works with young people, multi-sector coalitions, and policymakers to not only respond to youth and young adult homelessness in Washington state and across the U.S., but to prevent it from happening in the first place. And that kind of speaks to what we do at United Way to try to, get to the root causes to keep it from happening. What have been key parts of your work regarding youth homelessness? And can you talk about the impact around your homelessness work and your 3 priorities toward addressing youth homelessness?
Interestingly enough, youth homelessness was not initially a focus for us.
Oh, wow.
So a quick story for you. I believe I was actually coming down to a United Way meeting. This is back in 2011, and I was exiting at Union Street, stopped in traffic, and there's a cement ledge right there where, a lot of our community members experiencing homelessness used to gather. Now there's sort of a cyclone fence, but when I was stopped, I'm sure thinking about the agenda, I looked over and I saw something that really shocked me to my core. It was a young woman. She looked like she could be my daughter, blonde, sandy hair, jeans, high school sweatshirt. And she was standing in among a group of adult men. And I remember that visceral feeling that I had about fear for her, just given how vulnerable she would be, and deep anger for everyone in her life that must have failed her. And I have to tell you, it was that moment where I thought, I will never know her name, but I'm going to dig into figuring out answers. Because at that point in time, recognizing unaccompanied youth was not even a thing. The community had focused on chronic homelessness, had focused on veterans homelessness,
right.
But unaccompanied youth were not really identified as a discrete population. And the reason is because they're hidden.
Right.
They stay in the shadows because the streets are so dangerous. And so that really, I came back and I said, I want to know what our community is doing. I want to know what's happening around the country. And the answer came back, nothing, because it's not really recognized as an issue or a problem or a big problem. And so that's what brought us into the work. And as I hear you speaking, I think what an extraordinary journey this has been over the last close to 15 years of really working initially on just raising the issue into the light and creating awareness around it, to now where you're able to speak so eloquently about prevention, which is the goal of us continuing to work upstream to prevent homelessness and the trauma that young people experience in the first place. So I just had to recognize that, because as you're describing that now, it reminds me of how much progress our community's made.
Awesome.
Which is really exciting.
Awesome. I always tell people, no one counts the number of traffic tickets they didn't get from right.
Yeah.
So home prevention's always a hard sell, but man, when you can do it, it really does make it happen.
Absolutely. So back on your question though, you asked about challenges.
Mm-hmm.
I think for us, it's been because we were first generation. It's definitely been a learning curve for us.
Mm-hmm.
And I think at the root of our learning have been the young people.
Okay.
I think they have been the ones that have really helped, both when they bring the lived expertise, they have really made significant inroads into the progress that we have made both locally here as well as across the state and the country, honestly. And so for us, centering young people, making sure that they are at the table, they are part of the decision-making process for solutions,
mm-hmm.
I think have been really, really instrumental. And I can point to a number of huge wins in our state. I mean, you mentioned the diversion funds. I mean, if you think about where that started. And you can imagine going to public officials and saying, really, we'd like to have resources, in some cases, to, give them to our young people so that they can, address an issue that is an immediate crisis so that they can stay certainly housed, sometimes in school, employed. That was not an early, easy idea to sell. And so that's where philanthropy, bringing in the risk capital, can be so significant to really trial these approaches. And it's been such a successful program with young people actually being able to have the agency to drive their lives and their decisions. And it's been extremely successful, and I think a huge example of not only young people, having significant influence on a change, but also, I think, an early cornerstone to what prevention can look like.
Awesome. So staying with young people, talk about 3 of your initiatives related to education.
Mm-hmm.
The Education Future Fund, the Learner Studio, and the National Equity Project.
Yeah. So the Education Future Fund is something that really came together around 2021, when a lot of attacks were happening in our public school system. A lot of misinformation was coming in, and it was creating extreme chaos in our schools and disruption, with parents. And so we brought together many partners. It turns out over 30 partners to bring funding together in a pooled fund so that we could strategically deploy that to help mitigate a lot of the impact that was happening. This is really a national strategy for us. And we're still very engaged with that group today. It's matured quite a bit, but in the early days, a lot of the work that we were doing was to really get the right kinds of messages and narratives down, to teachers, to administrators, to parents, so that they could really understand the facts and what was happening, so that, our public education spaces were not being, challenged in the ways that they were. So the Education Futures Fund is one that I'm very, very proud of. And over that time frame, we have deployed over $20 million, into the field across many organizations that have really helped to hold the line, if you will, against a lot of the attacks to break down our public education. I think from our perspective, one of the true rights we have in this country is access to a quality public education. And so that's why we are deeply passionate about that issue. And we think it's so core for our young people to really thrive, is to have access to quality public education, to have safe and stable housing. And of course, the other cornerstone and newer portfolio for us is a healthy democracy. So we feel like those are all the key ingredients that will create the conditions for our young people, our next generation, to really be able to reach their full potential. But back on education funding, Future Fund, there are 5 core strategies that we focus on. One is coordinated organizing and advocacy. We work on the communications and narrative change. Interestingly enough, we waded into legal and litigation strategies. That has been a necessary tool in our toolbox to really stave off legislation that would be very damaging to our public education system.
Cool.
And then the 4th would be support for the educators and the school leaders. They're a vital connection to our young people, and we need to keep them safe and supported so they can continue to deliver, the quality education. And then finally, it's the cross-sector coordination in field building. So it is long-term work. All of our funders are deeply committed to it. And I think our point of view is it's not just about defending public education, but it's about reimagining education so that every child can have access to a quality experience.
Okay. And then the Learner Studio and the National Equity Project?
They are all really key intermediaries that we work with that work with our Building Equitable Learning Environments, which is a broad network of schools that are reimagining the conditions that need to change within schools to create the healthy environment for our young people to learn. So it is really, it's not about curriculum, but it's around the spaces that our young people are in the schools and the classrooms, and how the adults need to show up to create those safe, sort of stable, supportive places so that young people can show up and feel that sense of belonging, and also feel that they can show up fully themselves with the identity that they connect with.
So, Danie, that's looking back to you, and of course, this also is an education a component. But what are some of the greatest needs right now you see among young people that are served by YDIP?
Yeah. So, speaking of education, I just want to take the time to give a shout out to our YDIP providers. These are all people who've been certified in diversion. And I think one of the biggest challenges that you see with serving young people is you need to be able to build trust with that person and build it quickly and keep their attention span so that they can get served by the program and get what they need. Because I think, as you were mentioning in your story about the young woman, there are so many bridges that have been burned that have brought that young person to that place. And so you're going into something, someone may trust that caseworker that they met at like youth care or Vine Maple Place, and be able to share their story and say like, oh, well, I applied for this apartment, but I don't have the money to get the deposit, or, I'm now behind on rent here. It's going to ruin my credit. And so that's one of the biggest needs that we see with YDIP is to keep people like stably housed, as well as to pay off like rental assistance. I believe about 88% of our funding went to rental assistance, and then the other 12% went to flexible funding for that person. So all to keep them housed. I do think that there is just a really big need in King County for like rental assistance, for housing assistance, due to the cost of housing being so high and people coming from a spot where they're starting out at zero. Where do you get, $3,000 to put a deposit down on your first apartment? And so I think that's where we see kind of the biggest need for YDIP has been with like our rental assistance. And that would be funds like moving deposit, past due rent, and then sometimes eviction prevention. But we normally try and get to the young person before that eviction can get into place.
Perfect. So in your time, Danie, of doing this work, if you had to answer the question, prior to doing this work, I had no idea about blank. What would that blank be?
I had, I think, no idea like how quickly you need to act in terms of like getting funding out to someone. I work on the rental assistance side of things, and there's just a lot of red tape for those households to get their rental assistance. So it can take about 2 to 3 weeks for the applying. With YDIP, one of the things that Raikes wanted, as well as our other funder Building Changes wanted, was to make sure that we can get this funding out within 2 to 3 days of that young person. It's a requirement that we get this out within 72 hours. So being able to coordinate that with our providers, at first I was like, okay, girl, take a breath. You got this. Like, you can do it. But it's going to be a challenge. But I will say, like, due to the work of our providers, our lovely coordinator, Asha Na, we have met that, and most of our cases go out within 72 hours, or at least we can review them quickly. And then we can pay either the landlord or the young person directly, which is really nice because there are so few programs that allow you to pay the young person directly. So
that's fantastic because it really allows a young person literally not to skip a beat, right? If you can really sort of, stabilize right away, that's critical. That's fantastic.
So for Tricia, there's been a lot of conversation recently about the role of philanthropy, particularly in today's political climate. But truthfully, that's been an ongoing discussion for quite a while. What do you believe is the role of philanthropy in this space, including from a rapid response perspective, and as we've talked about from a prevention perspective?
I think philanthropy really has a unique role that sits between the public sector and the private sector. The private sector typically has a financial incentive to engage, and the public sector, because they're spending our tax money, will by design be much more conservative and want to make safer bets. And so I think where philanthropy sits, it really is the risk capital, and that's where a lot of innovation has to happen. And so I think that's the role of philanthropy, to really step in to figure out how do we solve some of these problems that the public sector isn't well suited to do, because it may take a few tries to get it right and to get the system or the approach tuned well. But when we do prove the efficacy, through some of that early innovation funding, then oftentimes we can have a strong case then to go to our public sector officials, and then they can help us scale the programs. So scaling it, whether it's across King County, whether it's across the state. So I think that's a really important role for philanthropy. And I think, we constantly have to remind ourselves that, some of that work, it will take time, because if these problems were easy to solve, they would have been solved. And we're dealing with some fairly complex systems. And so being committed to, the partnerships and in the timeline when it can roll out, I think has been, a role that philanthropy can play. I also think philanthropy can be quite responsive in moments of crisis.
Right.
And so whether it is, sort of an array of emergency needs, whether it's, attacks on our young people, whether there's a housing issue, I think philanthropy oftentimes can be more responsive than other funding streams can be. So I think that's important. But you really, I think your great examples, you've really talked about and given a great example of prevention. I think that is really where philanthropy can shine. It's a harder sell because you're actually promoting the absence of bad things from happening. And so it's a different set of metrics that have been, have forced our sector to really roll up our sleeves and understand sort of, how to think about that and be able to bring other partners along. But it's where we all want to go. That's our aspiration, is to really be in that prevention space, prevent the trauma from happening, allow our young people to stay on the path in school, employed, so that they can get into adulthood really prepared, for life. And so prevention is sort of our ultimate goal, because we want to keep them housed, we want to keep kids in school, and we want to support kids through transitions. I think one of the things I often share with some of my philanthropic colleagues is oftentimes we forget that with our own kids, that period in life, late teens and young adulthood, it is by nature a transitional time. Kids come after a school year, right? They're at home, and they oftentimes need a little help with getting their first car or getting a car repaired or first and last month's rent. That is a natural part of that stage in life. Right. And we all are the natural backstops for our kids. Right. But for many of our kids, they don't have the luxury of having those backstops. And so when they hit these moments of transition where there is a need, oftentimes a financial need, the program that we've just described here and some of the flexible funds, oftentimes that's all that's needed to really get through that moment of crisis. And that's what I think is so brilliant about YDEP.
So I kind of want to turn the question that I asked Danie for you. If you had to look at and say, prior to starting this work, I knew nothing about blank. And then also, can you just think about some stories, lessons, anecdotes from your foundation work that makes you say, you know what, that's why
I'm proud to be in this space?
Wow, there's a lot of them. I think right from the start, just, the notion that that it's possible that we have unaccompanied youth on the streets in Seattle as young as 12, and certainly, through the early 20s. I think that was the first shock to my system. I think one of the things that is sort of brilliant too, that oftentimes people have a narrative that young people choose to be on the streets. And in the almost 2 decades that I've been working in this space, I have never talked to a young person who chose to be on the streets. There are reasons that has become necessary for survival, oftentimes to make that choice. So those are some of the early basics. I also think one of probably the most amazing, I think, experiences that I've had is really being in the rooms where our young people are part of the inputs and decision making. They bring amazing wisdom forward, and I have been there when legislators have said, we can change that. We didn't know that those were the gaps that we didn't get correct, in the legislation, for instance. I think kids were also the ones that ultimately inspired the creation of the State Office of Homeless Youth. It was our young people that said, there is no public entity that is accountable, that actually is responsible for the issue of youth homelessness. And that was a huge light bulb, because when something would come up, everybody would point, because it didn't belong in juvenile justice, it didn't belong in, foster care. I mean, there was nobody that was responsible for the issue of homelessness. And that was a huge game changer when we put the Office of Homeless Youth into place in a public-private partnership with public funds and with philanthropic funds. And that has become, kind of a nexus to make sure that we can continue to work to deploy all of these wonderful programs broadly around the state so that our state can benefit. So we now have 94% coverage in counties around the state of Washington that have some level of support structures in place for our young people experiencing homelessness. Those are just a few.
Oh, that's great. That's great. And lastly, and this question is for each of you, doing this work, what gives you hope?
Yeah, I feel like a lot of stuff gives me hope, but I think really what gives me hope is the capability of the flexibility with these funds, and really allowing these young people who have been adultified at like an early age due to their trauma to advocate for themselves, to really be listened to, and give them agency to make their own changes in their life, which I think just brings that confidence to set them up for something greater. And I think it gives me hope, listening to Tricia and hearing about the role that philanthropy can take to kind of fill in the gaps and make sure that these programs are getting funded with or without any federal or governmental backing. So I think that that's really great. It gives me a lot of hope for the future.
Awesome.
Oh, for me, without question, it's the young people. It's what gives me my juice to do this work, because they demonstrate such resilience and are just incredibly inspiring. And we see it all the time, whether it's young people leading on climate initiatives or advocating for inclusive education or weighing in on housing policies. I mean, we see young people showing up in such productive, constructive ways in this work that will just make our systems and structures a lot better. And so for me, I think that's what brings me the joy. And the great news is they are not waiting for permission.
There you go.
Yeah, they are out there taking action and doing, really, working from sort of a place of true commitment to improve their own lives, but also the lives of so many of their peers too. And so even just sitting here with Danie, it inspires me because, you taking on the challenge of moving a process that typically took 2 to 3 weeks, down to 72 hours, and just made it happen. I mean, these are the kinds of, experiences that I get to be around all the time. And it's just a deep privilege for me.
Awesome. Danie, Tricia, thank you so much for all you do and for your time here in Hourglass. Really appreciate both of you.
Thanks for having us.
For more information about the Raikes Foundation's work to address youth homelessness, log on to raikesfoundation.org. For more information about United Way of King County's work to address youth homelessness, log on to uwkc.org, click on Get Help, and then click Housing Support for Youth. You know what goes hand in hand with summertime? United Way of King County's Summer Meals Program, which provides free, nutritious meals to youth under 18 throughout King County. United Way is proud to partner with the City of Seattle, No Kid Hungry, Hunger Free Washington, and the Office of the Superintendent of Public Instruction to provide free summer meals and help ease the financial burdens on families this time of year. Free summer meals programs are not hard to find. They're at parks, schools, recreation centers, and other places in your community. For more information about the Free Summer Meals Program, log on to freesummermeals.org. Do you love food and providing nourishment to local communities? The University District Food Bank is looking for volunteers to help serve food to members of its community. If you have just a few hours a week to give, you can make an impact on people's lives. University District Food Bank has volunteer opportunities Monday through Saturday, with some shifts during evening hours. For more information, log on to udistrictfoodbank.org. At United Way of King County, we are working side by side with communities to build an equitable future for everyone. Hourglass United Way is a podcast that highlights how we and our partners spend time making a difference in our communities. Our work is made possible by the generous donations from people like you. Please send comments and suggestions about our podcast to hourglassunitedway@gmail.com. To learn more about our work or to support United Way, log on to uwkc.org. I'm your host, Joe Burris. Thanks for listening. Until next time.